Hello and welcome to the Canadian North. Okay, going into step 13 now. I believe we find another batch of pieces, of plastic pieces that could be painted in advance by airbrushing. I'm talking about H32 in step 13. I'm talking about the funnels, C15, C22 in step 14. There is quite a bit of photo etch to be arranged for these ones. Talk about new platforms H20 and then H29. This is the upper part of the bridge, the command tower, and I have to wonder now about these long railings at the forward, at the bow of the ship, but we'll worry about that later. Let's see what else could be painted. There is this H3 on step H3, H14 and so on in step 16. There are quite a few pieces, H35, that could be painted in advance, and then I think in step 17 or just before step 17 we start falling into the boats. Well, the boats, I will have to take some decision about the boats. What else? What else? C32, C35 in step 18. Very interesting. And more boats in step 19. Have to worry about the boats a bit. And then we install some turrets in step 20, in step 19 too. And we have two pieces H4 in step 20. Okay, that's something. We start seeing some anchors and some bollards also in step 20. This is interesting. And then in step 21 we start building the aft conning structure. Yes, the aft command structure. Pieces H24, H37, there are a lot of them in this aft structure, step 21, even more in step 22. The davits for the boats, not yet. Oh yeah, there is a davit in step 22. Step 23, H23 for example, which resembles so much the railing we just did for the forward command tower. Step 25, more pieces for the command tower. And step 26, the same. Step 27, 28, a lot of photo etch. That I don't need to paint right now. And that's about it. But there are a lot of pieces. Now I could perhaps paint everything, including the boats. That is to finish the forward command tower and the funnels and the boats. And I'm gonna leave, it's possible that I would leave the aft command tower for later. I don't know how to do it. I have to worry about the boats pretty soon. I have to take some decisions about the boats, how to paint the boats. I'll have to look in those painting schemes that I found on internet for the boats. But even without the boats, we have a lot of pieces to paint to finish the forward command structure and the funnels. Yes, very interesting. Very interesting. As I said before, the Russian history was a tragic one, and one of the great tragedies that happened in Russia was the Soviet Communist Revolution in 1917, and that Communist Revolution was not a natural phenomenon, not something natural that happened in Russia. It was implemented from outside. When Lenin came to Leningrad from Switzerland, where he was living in exile, he came to Petersburg with a lot of German secret services support that wanted to see the Tsarist Russia in deep trouble, so they planted Lenin inside, and also with Jewish money. The Jews from eastern seaboard of the United States contributed greatly to Lenin's success in those first months in Petersburg. I mean, you can be the best speaker, and you can have the most genial ideas. If you don't have money, you are done, you are finished from day one. Lenin needed money to keep people around him and to pay for his private security and for the party apparatus in the first stages, and to bribe the Russian functionaries, Russian employees left and right. And that took a lot of money, and that money was coming from the Jews in the United States. Why? Because the Jews were very persecuted. They had a lot of suffering in Tsarist Russia, and many of them immigrated. And those families, they didn't forget their fate, their bad fate, and bad things that happened to them in Russia. So when the occasion arises, they try to contribute. They try to do something about that old regime in Russia against the Tsar, and they did it. They put Lenin in Russia, and later on they put Lenin in power with that money. And that's not something that you can read about in the mainstream currents of today's world, but that's what happened. Now, once communism installed itself, or rather was installed by somebody else in Russia, it started to have some very nasty consequences. One of them being, of course, the civil war, the Russian civil war, and another one being a tendency of trying to export the revolution to make other countries around Russia communist, and that was the case with Hungary in 1919, when everybody was gathered at Paris Peace Conference in 1919. The Bolsheviks in Kremlin, they were busy trying to stoke up a communist takeover in Hungary. And another consequence was the Polish-Russian War, 1919-1920. On one hand, Poland was trying to recover its older territories from 1790-92, and on the other hand, the Bolsheviks were trying to expand west, to impose their communism on Ukraine, on Poland, and of course on Hungary. But the most interesting one was what happened, or rather what didn't happen, in Germany in 1923. In 1923, Germany was in a huge economic and financial crisis. Everybody remembers the Weimar Republic and the inflation and economic misery and all the social problems. And Germany, you could say, Germany was on the brink of some sort of revolution. One big push towards a communist revolution, towards a leftist revolution, was coming from Kremlin, from Russia. And Stalin was now the big boss in Russia. Not yet very recognized in 1923, but he was having the power. And this is how Stalin himself described his role in the preparation which were being made for the revolution in Germany in 1923. The German Commission of the Comintern, consisting of Zinoviev, Bukharin, Stalin, Trotsky, Radek, and a number of German comrades, took a series of specific decisions that direct assistance to be given to the German comrades to enable them to seize power. Now, this communist revolution, this potential communist takeover of Germany, was planned in Kremlin, and the resources which were allowed to this revolution were quite enormous. The Bolsheviks in Kremlin, they decided at a secret meeting that nothing should be spared. All communists of German extraction living in the Soviet Union were prepared for action. A lot of personnel who spoke German were sent in Germany, and the Soviet embassy in Berlin became the nerve center for organizing the revolutions. Instructions from Moscow, a flood of money which was immediately spent on communist literature, and an avalanche of arms and ammunition all flowed through the embassy. Kremlin was trying to instigate, to organize a coup d'etat, a strike against, a leftist strike against Germany. And the German communists were given the responsibility of organizing a German secret police force and exterminate the bourgeoisie and the enemies of the revolution after the coup had taken place. The Soviet Central Committee of the Bolsheviks in Kremlin, they worked out the blueprint for the revolution in much detail, and then they approved it, and they even set a date for 19th of November 1923, and in the end the German Revolution did not happen. And there were a couple of reasons why the revolution didn't happen in 1923 in Germany. First, of course, the great majority of German population didn't enjoy the communist takeover, didn't favorize the communists. There were all kind of news coming from Soviet Russia, and the Germans didn't like at all what was happening there. And the German Communist Party didn't have the support it needed among the masses. Very important, Germany and the Soviet Union at the time did not share a common frontier. Poland was laying between the two countries. Had there been a common frontier, then the Red Army would have been in position to help the German Communist Party and its indecisive leaders. Perhaps the most important reason for the revolution not happening was that Lenin was dying. Lenin was dying, and for some time previously he had ceased either to govern or lead the world revolution, and there was a quiet war, a quiet confrontation between his potential heirs, Stalin being one of them, and so on. Now later on, when Stalin seized the power, he removed all obstacles standing in the way of the German Revolution. He brought order to the German Communist Party and mandated them to carry out Moscow instructions without any question. He established a common frontier with Germany. He annihilated the German social democracy by bringing the Nazis to the power. His position was very simple and based upon one principle. It was necessary to fight against the Social Democrats and the pacifists who were distracting the proletariat from revolution and war. In 1927, Stalin said, "It is impossible to finish with capitalism without first finishing with social democratism in the workers' movement." In time and with patience and with a lot of influence and with a lot of implication from the secret services and with a lot of money also, Stalin came to the conclusion that he has to support those forces who were against the peace, those forces who wanted to eliminate the Social Democrats and the pacifists. So the Nazi party had to be supported. Leave it to the Nazis to eliminate all these obstacles. The Nazi, let them start another war, let them destroy every state in Europe, every political party, every parliament, every army, and every trade union. In 1927 already, Stalin foresaw that the Nazis and Hitler would come to power, and he considered that this would be a positive event. It is precisely this fact which will lead to an exacerbation of the internal situation in the capitalist countries and the workers coming out in the favor of the revolution. Stalin did what he could to support the Nazis. In 1929-1930, Hitler was completely down. There was no money, and the party was in dire straits. And the money came from Moscow. Stalin saved Hitler. Stalin saved the Nazi party because he intended to manipulate them to do as much war and destruction as they could, and then Stalin and the Soviet Union will present themselves as the saviors of Europe. Of course, the savior who would save Europe, and will eliminate the Nazis, but they will impose their communist regime on everybody else. Trotsky said in 1936, without Stalin there would have been no Hitler, there would have been no Gestapo. And because Trotsky died in 1940, of course, he couldn't say without Stalin there would have been a second world war, because Trotsky didn't see the war. Stalin finally untied Hitler's hands, as well as those of his enemies, and thereby they pushed Europe towards war. He said this at a time when Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, was rejoicing that there will be no war. Mussolini was regarding himself as a peacemaker, and Hitler still had no intention of issuing a directive to attack Poland, even less France. At the moment when Europe was heaving a sigh of relief in the belief there would be no war, Trotsky already knew both that war would quickly come and who would be to blame for the war. At the beginning of 1930s, Stalin started to imagine that the Nazis would take over Germany, would come to power in Germany, and at some point Hitler would have to fight against France and Britain and the United Kingdom. And that was the ideal moment for Stalin, with all his with all his strength, would crush the neutral countries on his western frontiers, say Poland, Romania, the Baltics, thereby bringing himself nearer to the German border. In June 1939, Trotsky had made an even more extraordinary prophecy, that in autumn 1939 Poland would be occupied, and that Germany intended to attack the Soviet Union in summer or fall 1941. 2 years in advance of these events, Trotsky knew what was going to happen, and when, and whose fault was all this, and where all this started. How did he know all this? Well, he had been one of the leaders of the Bolshevik Party. He was the creator of the Red Army and its first leader. He had been the Soviet representative at the negotiation in Brest-Litovsk. He was the first head of Soviet diplomacy. He knew everything that was going on. He knew everything was moving at the surface and under the surface in Stalin's mind and in Stalin's close circle and within the Soviet secret services. He knew all this, and this is how he was able to predict with such great accuracy. In the end, for Stalin, German Nazism and Adolf Hitler were to be an instrument which would break a path for the revolution through the solid ice of the peace in Europe, an icebreaker. German Nazism could begin the war, and the war would lead to the communist revolution. Let the icebreaker break Europe. Hitler could do what it did not suit Stalin to do. Hitler could attack France and UK and perhaps even destroy them, and then the German army would be the only opponent in Europe, and Stalin was building the Soviet Red Army with one target in mind, to take over the whole Europe. We shall move, said Stalin, but we shall be the last to move in order to throw our weight on to the scales and tip the balance in the very end. In Europe, Stalin needed crisis, war, destruction and hunger. Hitler could achieve all this for him. The more crimes Hitler committed in Europe, the better it would be for Stalin, and the more reason he would have one day to send the Red Army into Europe as her liberator. Trotsky understood all this before the Second World War began, and even before Hitler became Chancellor. Let them come to power, said Trotsky in 1932, explaining what Stalin's attitude was to the German Nazi. Let them compromise themselves, and then, well, then... So from 1927 onward, Stalin made every effort to support the Nazis, who were then striving for power, and he did not, of course, do so publicly. In 1933, Stalin would do everything possible to push the Nazis towards war. When they entered the war, Stalin would order the communists living in democratic countries to temporarily become pacifist, to demoralize the armed force of the Western countries, to open the way for the Nazis, and to capitulate later with a demand that the imperialist war should be stopped, and of course the Red Army was to be welcomed all over the Europe as the final liberator. When he moved his icebreaker, the German Nazism, against Europe, Stalin had already passed the death sentence on it. Stalin has been planning to liquidate the Nazis for 5 years before they took over in Germany. Fascism was the hangman of Europe. Stalin supported the hangman, but even before the hangman had begun his work, Stalin had prepared the same fate for the hangman as awaited the hangman's victims. This is a part of history that's, of course, a big explanation for the beginning of the Second World War. And coming back to Russian history, which I've said many times, it was and it is a tragic history with a lot of suffering and with a lot of wars and a lot of social and economic upheavals. Coming back to this history, you can see that in key moments, the major decisions that appeared to have been taken in Europe were actually took in Kremlin. And you can see the degree of manipulation the Kremlin is able to do. In 1930s, I mean in 1927, those people barely had electricity, and there was no internet, of course, and no mass media, and except for the printed papers. And you can imagine what kind of manipulation they are able to create now with all these tools at their power, with YouTube, with many channels on internet and so on. So before passing judgment about Vladimir Putin war in Ukraine, you have to dig a bit deeper and to see, if you can, what really is going on behind the curtains in Kremlin. and then to look at Washington or Paris or London or even Kiev, because my feeling is everything was put in place by Kremlin, and they knew from the beginning it's gonna be complicated, but they wanted to try it, so they started this war in Ukraine. And of course, doing this model, we touched to the model, we touched to the Russian history a bit, and we have fun with these theories and with historical facts indeed. And looking back almost 100 years ago, you can see, you can start to explain what happens even today between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and the Baltic states. I mean, look, Russia attacked Ukraine. Do you really think Russia would have stopped attacking and incorporate right away the Baltic states 2 years ago, when if the Baltic states were not part of NATO? It's a good question, eh?